So I like to take a picture with everybody before I start to talk.
We're gonna have copies of that.
I'll post them on the meetup. So, hear me good? Okay, so my name's Jamie Phillips. I work for a company out of Washington, D.C. named Boxboat. So we specialize in Kubernetes and containers, hence the name. I've been there about a month now. So, so today we're going to talk about learning Kubernetes with MicroK8s. So we'll get into what it is. So MicroK8s is by Kanako, who makes Ubuntu. It is packaged as a snap with Snapcraft. So it's Snapcraft plus Kubernetes gives you MicroK8s. Now, a lot of people are going to ask the question, why not MiniCube, MiniShift? Why not install Kubernetes? And I will demonstrate why that is the case. But with those, especially like MiniCube, you have to have a hypervisor. You have to understand how to use the hypervisor, pass the driver to it. There's a little bit of setup there involved, right? And there's lots of extra functionality that MicroK8s is just going to bake in that makes it a little easier to learn. Because it's about learning Kubernetes, not administering Kubernetes, especially for a lot of people, because most people are probably going to use a cloud provider. And that's another thing to consider is a lot of people think you have to use the cloud to learn Kubernetes. You don't. You just need a virtual machine or a physical machine with Ubuntu. Actually, not even just Ubuntu. So it's a certified Kubernetes distribution. So you have some assurance that it is actually Kubernetes. It's not a side project that just ships it. It's actually certified, which means that it's going to meet all the criteria of the Kubernetes project for being a Kubernetes distribution. So that may be no different from Rancher or K3S or MiniCube, OpenShift.
Thanks. So I wasn't aware that that was a thing. So if I want to guarantee that my deployment is cloud agnostic, I've got a defined subset of what APIs that I can guarantee will be there as long as I use any certified Kubernetes distribution?
Yeah, you'll assume that there's nothing special, right? That everything that you typically use will just work. So that's something to look for in a Kubernetes distribution. I think most clouds are certified Kubernetes, right? They don't do much special things. So when you get into your cloud, different cloud providers, you get into your container networking interface, so your CNI, and that's where a lot of them differ, is there's lots of limitations there. So lots of projects kind of ship out of the box. So you get Istio, that's not going to work. So you get Istio, Linkerd, Knative, you can turn on, Core DNS, FluentD, Prometheus, Grafana, Helm, Docker, kind of bundled all up in there. Now all this stuff's not enabled by default, but there's a nice command to let you turn on these add-ons. That's what they call them. And that's a lot easier than having to go find the Kubernetes manifest and execute those on whatever, other distribution you're trying to run. So, like for example, MiniCube doesn't have FluentD baked in. There's no easy way to turn on FluentD. You have to go to the documentation and do a lot of extra steps. So this is a quick and easy way just to play with things. And there's some things here I'm not listed. I think they've added Jaeger recently. So that's kind of cool. I mentioned the lots of tech real quick. You don't have to worry about most of those. As you learn, you'll grow into those or you'll discover that you have this specific need. And trust me, there's probably already something there that meets it. So it's not only supported on Ubuntu. That's why a lot of people think about snaps. There's 42 some odd Linux distributions that Snapd runs on. This is just a subset. So if you're using CentOS or Rail, you can install Snapd, the client for snaps, and install the snap. It'll run the same there as it does on Ubuntu. So that's kind of nice from a learning perspective. So what do you need? Kind of covered that earlier. You need a physical server or a virtual machine or with a supported OS. I'm going to be doing Ubuntu 18.04 plus, so I'll actually be on 19.10 here, so it doesn't really matter. Snaps are kind of interesting because they're basically just a container, and it is Ubuntu 18.04 inside this container. So there's no magic there. They just orchestrate a lot of it. So installation, we'll run through some demos here if the Wi-Fi ends up being good, but I got the commands. So Installation is pretty simple. It's this one line. This flag on the end, that's classic, just has to do with the confinement. Kubernetes or MicroK8s needs a lot of access to your system resources to do what it does, so you have to kind of break confinement from a security standpoint. So not a big deal, but something to be aware of. But that's it. And the cool thing about the snap daemon is that if you don't lock it to a channel or a specific version, so you don't pin it, it auto upgrades. So just know if you're doing something and you need it.
Right.
Well, for a learning environment, that's perfectly fine, right? Like you're always on the newest, cutting edge. If you want to pin it to a version, then you can specify like you want 16.0.8 or 15 or 14, and you'll get that version of Kubernetes, which is good because then you can match your cloud provider or whatever, so you can run it locally and do tests. One step that I would suggest is it's going to get really frustrating to type sudo MicroK8s, all these commands. So I would add yourself to the group for that. That just makes it easier to run the commands, makes them shorter. And then you can just check your status. So there's a command here, status. If you're just installed it, then you'll do the wait ready because it'll just wait till it's done. Otherwise, it'll tell you it's not ready. It's not running. And then when it's running, it starts telling you all the add-ons that you have enabled. So this is bone stock install. I cut off a lot of the add-ins because there's about 18 of them. And you can see they're all disabled. So then we get into like checking status. First thing you want to get in the habit of, get into Kubernetes environments. What are my nodes? So you can see here I got a single node at version 17. You can cluster MicroK8s. There is a join command, so you can join multiple nodes. So you could theoretically run this in a production environment, like on-prem if you wanted to, or even in the cloud. Like, not saying you should, I'm just saying you could. I'm building a cluster at home using MicroK8s on a Raspberry Pi, along with a couple of NUCs, because it's just easy, right? I don't have to think about anything.
Is that a custom version of kubectl? Is the command actually MicroK8s.kubectl?
Yeah, so kubectl ships with MicroK8 Snap. So in Snap world, you got your app name dot program inside of the Snap.
I'm not familiar with
So this is calling the real kubectl. It's not some special binary. It's the actual. It's just the binary inside the container.
So it's a wrapper. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a wrapper. You can alias this to kubectl. You can also use kubectl you download, and if you just take your MicroK8's path to your kubeconfig, you put that in your environment variable, you won't need to use that at all. So a little bit more advanced. So you can see here, I checked all namespaces. This will be different from a regular Kubernetes. There's nothing running at all. So there's absolutely nothing installed. So kind of an interesting thing to note about MicroK8s. So if you want to enable add-ons, which I would recommend kind of a basic set. So here you can see that I'm enabling the dashboard. So this is the Kubernetes dashboard. In a regular Kubernetes install, you would install a manifest from the Git repository to install all the pieces for the dashboard. I'm enabling core DNS. If you want to play with it or not, you don't have to, but why not? It's pretty standard. I'm actually creating a Docker registry that's hosted inside of my MicroK8s. So if you want to play with publishing images and pulling those without actually having to go outside of your own system, you can do that. So you can just publish right to the local repository. There's no security on it. So just be aware. And then I'm installing metric server. So this is really cool. This is a replacement for Heapster, even though Heapster kind of still shows up name-wise. This is what collects metrics on your node or on your nodes in your pods. So this is going to be your CPU and memory usage. And I got an example of that later on when we use that. And then, so here I'm listing all the pods after I've done that. So you can see I got a registry in here now. I got core DNS. I got my dashboard. I got a lot of my metric server. I got all my backing Grafana and Influx database. And then this is something specific to Kubernetes, is this host path provisioner. So this is how you're going to provision storage on there when you get there. So saying a lot of high level concepts, but you can install this locally. If you feel like you hosed it, snap remove MicroK8s, snap install MicroK8s, and now you're back fresh again. So you don't have to have any fear of playing with this, right? So then we can run our first pod. So just showing that this kind of works like Kubernetes. We're going to pull down the Nginx. You can tell I've taken a CKA recently because I do it this way now. This actually has a lot of meaning in kubectl. This automatically generates a certain type of resource. So if you restart always, we'll make a deployment. Restart never means make a pod. So you can see here I got a pod created. And then when you're playing around with this, I can get the pods. You can see I have one here running 35 seconds from when I did the command, or 59. And then we can execute commands against that pod. So this is like testing that this actually works. So I deployed a pod, so we know we can deploy pods to our MicroK8s, and then I'm going to execute any command I want to in here. I just said spit out all the environment variables. That gives you some interesting stuff. So you can see here, I've trimmed this down a little bit. You can see this is running on Debian Buster, right? And my Nginx versions 1.17.6 and my home directory /root, probably what you'd expect in a container. And then another cool thing about MicroK8s is it ships with Helm. So you can enable Helm to start deploying charts. However, this is Helm 2, not Helm 3. So I don't know if you've tracked the differences. Helm 2 uses a thing called tiller that runs inside your cube. Not really secure by a lot of people's standards and ideas. Helm 3 kind of removes that. That's coming in the next version. So if you don't pin it to a channel, you could very well log into your computer, later that day if they push that day, and you'll be on Helm 3. So just know that's how it's going to work.
And just to be clear, this is not intended for production, right?
It's intended for IoT Edge. Okay. It's kind of what they market it as. So I would say it's production ready. Would I personally run my company's thing on there? No. What I would do is if I was a dev shop and I couldn't get Kubernetes or I didn't want to run Docker and run containers on a Docker host, I'd just install MicroK8s and then deploy my containers to MicroK8 so I get the orchestration, but it'd be a single node, right?
Yeah.
That way you don't have to worry about somebody going and run Docker run to run an app, right?
Yeah, I've been in a situation where I have a single host running Docker containers.
Yeah.
So this would give me just kind of Kubernetes without having to worry about all the clusters.
Yeah. And it's a good test bed and a place to play around, right?
Interesting.
So you have to init your Helm. So you just run Helm init. It tells you, hey, it's installed tiller. I'm putting it in the default namespace. You never ever want to do that, but since this is a playground, I'm living on the edge. So just know that a lot of examples you're going to see around MicroK8s is really geared toward not production usage. So you'll have to rely on the Kubernetes documentation to implement some of the other standards. So you can install WordPress pretty easily just by running the Helm chart. And you can see here I got it deployed, and then I get pods. You can see I got my MariaDB and my WordPress running. This is pulling down the Bitnami image, which has a default username and password. One thing to note about MicroK8s is it doesn't have a load balancer. Most Kubernetes not running in the cloud don't have load balancers natively. If you're running on bare metal, you can install metal load balancer, which is made by Kanako, so it's meant for running Kubernetes on bare metal. So you can actually have a load balancer. I didn't take the time to figure out all the CIDR ranges that I had to tell it from my local box to make it work. So, but I'll run through all these commands. Hopefully it'll work and it'll make a little bit more sense because we can play around.
So with MariaDB, is it assuming there's a persistent volume?
So it'll probably, so I didn't look at the chart, but more than likely it's probably using an empty dir and doing it from the host path provisioner. But this would, my guess would be the reclaim policy on that. Like if you shut it down, it's fine, but if you delete it, it's gone, right? So that's the big thing with storage in Kubernetes is if the container's just stopped, it's persisted. If you delete it, it's gone, right? So you'll want to use something more persistent storage in Kubernetes to make sure you have long-term storage of your file systems. So you can experiment with all that. I have some blog posts about running SQL Server on Linux on MicroK8s and try to figure out what persistent volumes would look like for that and to be able to bring back a database when I delete a pod and deploy a new one. So the interesting thing about that I learned is that permissions, especially with this host path provisioner, are always jacked up. So the MySQL and a lot of databases, Postgres is known for this. It doesn't run as root user. It can't. And so your pod doesn't have, well, your container in your pod doesn't have root permissions, but the file system is mounted to your pod as root. So what I had to do was using a init container to reassign file permissions when it all started up. Yeah, it gets complicated. But the cool thing is I sat down over the course of 3 days and did this all locally in MicroK8s. So now I know how to do this, so I can do this anywhere, right? And it didn't cost me any money because, you know, they can get expensive. Metrics, everybody's familiar with top, that's best with Linux. So kubectl supports the top command. So if you have the metrics server installed, after it's had some time to collect metrics, you will see this pop up. And so you can see here that I'm using 78 megabytes of memory for my MariaDB, 172 for WordPress, and then my CPU core usage. This is good command to know to learn how to constrain your containers, because Kubernetes needs resource limits put on containers for the scheduler. Because if your container doesn't have resource limits, then if something comes in with resource limits, that will get deprioritized and killed to make room for something that could be scheduled. So just know that your scheduler could kill pods that don't, or containers that don't have resource limits defined. So that's something you can test and learn about here in this environment in a safe way, right? There's a Docker container, I can't think of what it's called. I won't say it's like a memory monster or something like that. It's meant to just eat memory and then kill your cluster. So you can play with that here locally in a safe way. So I talked about clustering. So there's a join command. So you can join multiple Ubuntu instances running with MicroK8s. Limitations, we talked a little bit about the load balancer. Storage can get interesting. I've not tried a lot of the other storage types other than the host path provisioner. That's generally recommended. You'll have to go to something else if you start clustering and you have multiple nodes you need to share that storage. You'll have to rely on your Linux admin foo to get you through getting all that mounted and getting it shared between all the nodes. So that's one kind of limitation. So we're going to see if we have some connectivity and we'll do a demo. This talk was originally planned to be more demo heavy, so.
Well, Zoom seems to be working, so we should have connectivity.
Yes. Okay. Let's see what we can get to font-wise here to everybody can hopefully see. Can everybody see that pretty well? So let me get my cheat sheet over here pulled up.
doesn't show up on the screen, you don't have to admit to it.
Oh, I will. I'm honest.
Crank all this up.
So here we're going to install,
So is this just a bare Ubuntu server then?
so I'm on my local machine right now.
Okay.
So I'm no magic. It's this box right here. It's got plenty of horsepower, 6 cores, 12 threads, 32 gigs of RAM. So
Ubuntu.
yeah, it's Ubuntu Mate to be specific, 1910, so not old, dated. So here we go. So you can see I'm pulling from channel stable. Stable will always track whatever the tip of the versions are. So I could have done -- channel and said, 13, 14 with that. And then you'll see that it starts doing a lot of connections. And when it starts doing these connects, that's wiring up access from the container to the actual host system. So if you want a little insights. So see, I got it installed. I don't feel like I'll wire up the user group. Then I'm going to get that loaded. Tell everybody my password while I'm at it here. So let's see if my cluster's up yet. And you can see it's running. So here's all the options of things that I can install. There's ingress controllers, Jaeger, Juju, which is a canonical thing, Kubeflow, RBAC. So that's one thing I didn't install in any of these examples is I'm running without any role-based access control. You'll definitely want to do that if you're doing production. That is not as painful as it used to be, but don't go assigning everybody cluster roles because that's big roles. Always scope people to a namespace and to a role in that namespace. That's just good practice. And this is a good place to mess with RBAC and learn all the nuances of it without having to worry about hosing a production cluster and nobody can get in, right? So you see here, that's kind of like, so I'm going to enable, actually the first thing I should probably do is, so you can see autocomplete works pretty well. So I'm going to get my nodes. So you can see that's this machine here. There's more commands you can run from kubectl. I think I can inspect a node. If I got this right. I don't remember. Oh, no, I don't know the command, so that's why I go off script. And so we see I got one node running. We can see that I have no pods. So there are actually no pods found because there's none running. All namespaces will get both. There's always a default namespace, and then there's a kube system namespace, and that's where all the brains of Kubernetes runs. So all namespaces should list that. We're using the newer version of kubectl, so I think, be able to do A. So if you didn't know that trick until like a couple weeks ago, you can do -big A.
Wait, so -big A is what all?
Is all namespaces, yeah. Yep. It's a nice shorthand to know. And then we are going to enable the dashboard, the DNS registry, and the metric server. So it's basically just pulling down all the YAML manifest files for me. It knows where to go get those. So that's kind of nice. So now, when I talked about this, we talked about the top command. You can see here, I don't have any metrics. Not all of it's spun up yet. Nothing's collected, so it didn't work.
I'm sure your pods are running now.
Okay, well, we can do that. Let's clear this here. So we'll go back up here. So now you can see I got all of my add-ons installed and running. Most of them are going to be in the kube system namespace. It's nice that it does put the container registry in its own namespace by default. So now I'm going to run an Nginx pod. We could easily do BusyBox. that's something that you'll learn here. So I created an Nginx. Let's run this again and let's do BusyBox. And you'll see some interesting behavior. Give it their name. Hold on. Trying to look here and type at the same time. So we'll make a demo too. Now, when I do, you can see I have 2 pods running. Now my BusyBox pod is marked as completed. And that's because it ran, there's not a loop, there's no sleep in there, right, like an application would have. So it's finished, it's done. So keep that in mind as you're playing around. If you're trying to run something that you want to stay up, then, you know, what a lot of people will do is they'll deploy a BusyBox pod so they can go in there and test things inside their cluster like connectivity. Always give it a sleep command, and then that way you can exec into it just like you would with Docker. So then you can be at the root of the pod. So we can demo that. So I can exec in here to my demo pod, or I could easily just say, give me bash. So now I'm actually inside the cluster on the container. So you can do a lot of the same things you would do like you used to with Docker. You can do that in Kubernetes. So this is a good way to get in here and test connectivity if you have a service that's not working or some locator, or you need to get storage. You could read logs here, but that's kind of unnecessary because you can easily just I have to do pod demo. I think I just do.
You said everything runs as root, right? That's why you're root when you bash in there?
Yeah.
But you can set it up to not be root, correct?
Yeah, you can. In Kubernetes, there's a thing called a security context. So you can define it to run as another user. In the manifest, your container can also be set up to run the process as another user, right? So in your Docker file, you can add a user in a group, and then
That's the idea, yeah.
yeah. And you can also, with manifests and Kubernetes in general, while we're talking about security, you can lock down permissions and access to things. So like if you want people to be able to read time or access time commands, you will have to, if you're not using root, you'll have to grant them those specific permissions as part of the context. So there's lots of things to learn, and you can do that in this environment pretty well. I actually use this to study for my CKA. Shouldn't go live. Get nervous, forget commands. Is it log? It's logs. Logs and pod name, right?
I think it's logs demo, there's just no logs. Try demo 2.
Yeah, there is no logs, is there? That's right. Well, there's other ways to get this information. And we can see that here. Now I got to do pod. Right. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Sorry. And you're like, and this person passed their CKA? Yeah. So we have a dashboard. We installed that. This will not look comfortable for a lot of people to have to get to the dashboard. You can do RBAC or you can do token based. Right now we don't have any RBAC, so we have to do token. So we just grabbed our token, or secret. So there's a secret object in Kubernetes. They're base encoded, base 64 encoded. They are not encrypted. So they are in fact not secret. Just use something else. So if you're doing this locally, don't use real things. Just don't. I mean, maybe if you have your hard drive encrypted, maybe, but I wouldn't. This is where things like Key Vault in Azure, can't think of what it is in AWS, KMS, Vault by HashiCorp. And HashiCorp just released with Vault a new sidecar container that can decrypt things from Vault, even though your app may not know how to do that. So that's kind of nice. So this token here, I'm going to have to grab. I will need this. And then we are going to put forward. So this is basically proxying the internal dashboard out of the cluster so I can access it from my machine. Did I get this right the first go? Yes. So if I let you see behind the curtain here, and I go to my local host.
Zoom.
Yep. I know where I'm typing at now.
You're not typing in the address.
Oh, I'm in the wrong browser. That's why. And of course, it's not using any, valid SSL cert. That's perfectly fine. So I should be prompted here with how I want to log in. I'm going to do a token. And then you can see here, I got the Kubernetes dashboard. So you can see I got my 2 pods running. This has been terminated. You can see how much memory my demo container is using. And CPU, which not really using anything. So you can kind of explore around in here in the dashboard. It's going to be a lot of the same information you're going to get from the CLI, but it is definitely nice from a high level. There's not going to be any persistent volumes. You can see we got one secret for the service account. And then not a lot much other things. There should be a daemon set here, which I guess it's not showing me. Oh, here we go. If I go to the cube system namespace, there should be a daemon set, right? Or is it not? See, this gets into some interesting things here. I guess core DNS is a static pod. So anyway, you'll notice some differences. Like some things in production Kubernetes will be in daemon sets. There's some differences when it gets into the backend side. But from a user side where you're deploying applications, learning how to do the objects, it's going to be almost identical. So that's how you would proxy into your dashboard. So these are normal things you're going to do with Kubernetes, but I'm doing them all right here, right? And we're doing them live. So that's even more fun. So now we can get to something a little bit more interesting. So this one doesn't have Helm enabled, right? So we can enable Helm. And then we need to init our Helm. So yet again, pulling down some stuff, executing some things that it downloaded earlier, giving me my warning that Tiller's not secure where I have it. So, you should really have RBAC. Should namespace it. And then, we can go through installing WordPress. So, that's interesting. Is it not running yet? It wasn't running. So, should check that. So, you can see here my username, password. I can go to the Bitnami website and pull that down. I could proxy into that, or you'd think you would have if you look at the chart, you'll notice that they're talking about there's a service that exposes that through a load balancer. So if we go here and take a look, you'll see that we got our 2 pods. Well, they're still creating. So we'll wait till that gets done. We can do a watch command. So you can see that the WordPress is up and running, but the MariaDB is not. So they're running, but you notice it doesn't say they're ready. So if you, if we go in here and look, so let's just say we're going to look at the MariaDB, right? Like what makes a pod ready? We can do all that. And the funny names are the funny names are a Helm thing. So it always does an adjective and a noun. So you'll see lots of weird, crazy names.
Docker does that too.
Yeah.
Docker does that too.
Yeah, Docker, Heroku, yeah. So it's kind of cool. If you need a unique name, you could name these things, but when you're playing around, why not have a little fun? So we can see here, I'm describing my pod. You can easily export this out as YAML if you wanted to see it as YAML, if you wanted to save it and then make something new from a pod that you didn't create. So while you're learning, if you create these things with these Helm charts and you want to know how they made them, you can output that as YAML, go edit it, manipulate it, change it, and then make something new. And then you can do a lot of learning that way. And that's going to be really useful if you decide to take something like the CKA, is being able to bootstrap your manifest files to create things. You'll get very familiar with the run command, but instead of like, I'll demo that. So you can see here, there's a liveness probe. So this checks, this runs these commands to check that, MariaDB is actually running. And the readiness check executes another set of commands. Usually they're the same command to make sure. So readiness reports that it's ready. Liveness reports that it's like done creating. So there's two steps there. It's a good idea to always put those in there. You can see here, these are just looking for the process to make sure that it's running and working. So make sure you keep that in mind. That's something to learn about is ways to do that. Because I wouldn't have thought, I'm used to doing web stuff, so it's always hit an endpoint. And then you start running databases, you're like, well, what makes a database ready? What makes it live? I did a web service because I just deploy a web service to do it. So, it's things to think through when you're getting there. So, so while we're on the topic here real quick, and I mentioned it, I can do run and then demo 3, and then I can say image, let's do another nginx, and then I can do restart equals never, which will automatically make me a pod. And then there's this command called dry run, which says, tell me what this is going to do, but don't do it, which is kind of nice, right? And then I can do an output of YAML, and then I can pop that to a demo3.yaml file. And now if I open that up, that's what it's going to do, which is kind of nice. So, okay, you're like, great, you got this. What are you going to do with it? Well, there you go. It's that simple.
Does it also do XML? Or?
Just YAML or JSON. You got your choice.
I don't like XML.
And in the default editor, so like I have this pod running, you can, so this is a whirlwind tour here. I know I'm overloading you all the information, but I'm trying to demonstrate that you can do a lot of things here you'd normally do locally.
And I would point out that as long as the recording turns out okay, this will be on YouTube. Lob Cities, Tennessee channel we put our videos on. So you'll be able to go back and see this.
So you can live edit pods. So I can make a change here, save it. If it's a change that I'm allowed to make to a running pod, then it will work. If it's not a change, then it will not work. So we're running Nginx 1.17, right? I don't know my Nginx versions off the top of my head. So let me go find a different version and we'll just change the version. And what that will do is it will pull the new container. So you'll see it kills the pod and builds a new pod with the new version. So I'm running the Buster version, right? I can easily just switch this out. So I'm in the screen here. So let's find where my image is, right here. And I can append. And now if I do you can see my pod's running. And so if I describe my pod, it should be at this new version now. So let's see here. Yeah, so now you can see I'm not running 1.17 on Buster anymore. I'm running iPod. That's pretty quick. So some changes you can make, some changes you can't. It will tell you. So sometimes you'll have to just output it to YAML and then delete it and recreate it. Keep in mind, you're like, well, what editor are you using? It's Vim. That is the default by kubectl. So if you're not comfortable with Vim, you'll have to tell it what editor you want to use before you run the command. So like Nano. If you do take the CKA, I'm sure Nano's installed, but it pretty much expects Vim to be used.
But you can install it.
Your editor variable.
I don't know if you take anybody use Emacs seriously. I'm just joking. Just joking. For those online, I'm joking. So I'm glad I spent time to learn Vim a long time ago. I'm no expert at Vim at all, but I know how to exit and do basic commands. So, and for anybody that's not aware, the Vim tutor command, just run that and go through the exercises. That really helps learn a lot of the basics anyway. So that's all that I have. Kind of just showing you, like, this is mostly 95% Kubernetes. This is not anything special. So that's the takeaway here, is that these commands would work the same in Azure AKS or in DigitalOcean Kubernetes Service or EKS. You know, the basics are going to be the same. You might have to do a little extra authentication dance up front to get in, but once that's taken care of, command lines are all going to be the same. All kubectl is going to be the same. Good thing about kubectl is it's typically backwards compatible, a couple versions. So if you're managing multiple clusters, don't have to worry about the commands being all that different. They'll tell you if things are deprecated. So like, I was using the run command here. There's generators. A lot of those are kind of deprecated now. So if I did a create deployment command, it would say it's deprecated. They want you to use run now for the generator. So there's things like that you'll learn, but getting comfortable with it, MicroK8s, I think is great because I'm here besides an internet connection. And if I was building pods or building containers and pushing them to the internal registry, then I really wouldn't even need the internet beyond the basic install. So you could be on a plane doing a lot of this if you want to be advantageous and build everything from scratch, or cache all your Docker images and push them to your registry. So we got any questions? I don't know if I can see questions online.
So you can run this full stack of Kubernetes, MicroK8s on your mic, so you're not going to run.
You will need a Linux.
Oh, Linux.
You will need Linux.
Okay, that's the Linux version.
Yeah, so Ubuntu has, or Canonical has come out with this thing called Moz. It's a really cool project from, let me see, I want to see if I can find it and I'll post a link to it.
There's nobody else online. I'm just using Zoom
Okay.
to record.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. So Canonical has some virtualization software that should make it a little easier to run some stuff now. It's like multi-pass. That's what I'm thinking of, multi-pass.
Seems to me like it's like a development type of environment. It'd be advantageous to a lot of our developers who run Mac OS to have that ability to run right there, you know. Where they go.
Yeah, so multi-pass.
Includes Kubernetes.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's certified too, isn't it? Yeah. And then multi-pass, if you want to run Ubuntu VMs from, and this is the same across Linux, Windows, and Mac. So they just announced that release.
Include Corbin Dallas.
So, but yeah, it's pretty much Linux focused because it's a snap, and they just don't have the hooks in Mac for that. WSL2, this should work okay on if you're a Windows user. I'm not going to promise it works great. You could just spin up an Ubuntu server in the cloud for cheap and like I'll drop it and install it.
Have you checked out Presence yet? Presence is pretty cool. It's local Kubernetes. It's a lot like this, but local Kubernetes development. You just basically, a lot like all of these tools, you just connect it to your cloud provider and you can debug locally.
And then there's K3S by Rancher, which is in the same space. It's single binary. The cool thing about it for me is I'm more comfortable with SQLite than I am with SCD. So it's basically SQLite backed Kubernetes. So
Do you ever have to dig into that though?
no,
Hopefully not.
you have to do that on your exam though.
Really?
Yeah. So yeah, that's not unknown what you got to do there. But yeah, you do have to know because you have to back up your SCD, right? Because even if you're in a quorum, especially with like your local instance, that's one thing to keep in mind. Like, don't do anything that you want to keep. If you got anything that you want to keep, back it up, export it, save manifest files, version control. Don't build something out and then walk away thinking that you're good to go, that you'll have it tomorrow, like, because maybe they upgrade. You leave your computer running and the Snap Daemon upgrades your Kubernetes and something hoses, right? So I don't know what the likelihood. I've been through 16 to 17 automatically and things just kept working. So
I know the old way to install with that, you can lock a specific version down.
you do that by specifying a channel.
Oh, the channel?
Yep. So
I mean, they're containers, so it's the same concerns as with any other container. You know,
Right.
it's not, tends to not be persistent. It can go away.
yeah, so they do mount Squash FS file systems to your machine when you're running snaps. They hide them, but you can get to them if you really wanted to. So it's kind of cool. So if I do MicroK8s, and that's a big difference if you're familiar with a lot of these packaging formats now. There's snaps and there's flat packs. Flat packs mainly geared toward desktop apps. Snaps are a little bit of everything. They kind of started with Ubuntu Snappy Core, where they were trying to make the whole operating system modular. So you can see here, I can install the latest or I can install a channel. So if I get down here to channel, see, I can already get 1.18 if I wanted it. It's Edge, but it's there. So like I can say I want to install this channel for 16, and then there's the command. And this basically pins it when I say the channel. So it'll get all your bug fix releases, but it won't change your version. Yeah. So, and the cool thing here is that your kubectl is in lockstep. But you can run a local one and just do your kubeconfig or copy out your credentials. So it's not forcing you to type MicroK8s every single time if you don't want to.
So can we go to the screen before that you were talking about that?
Which one? Oh, multipass?
Yes. So, okay, so if I'm understanding what this is that this is, you can
with Windows, you can make a virtual machine with that, so like that VMS that makes it look like something on the cloud, or that you can use. Isn't that what that? Isn't that
No,
what
it's
that means?
just a hypervisor and a, yeah, it's kind of interesting how multipath works. I've not played with it too terribly much, but it's pretty cool technology. So they call it a MeCloud. Yeah, you'd have to play with it. I've only read about it and heard people talking about it. So, but I know it's out there, and they just officially announced it's been released. So,
But let me just say it again, it's like I'm trying to get it in my head. Okay, if you forgive me. Okay, so it's a virtual machine. It makes a virtual machine that acts like you're operating in the cloud, correct?
I don't know. I don't know if I could say that from.
I think it's just an abstraction, so like instead of having to like figure out what the hypervisor is for a platform you're on,
Yeah.
just read the description, so like just an abstraction. So
Yeah, it's
run a command and
it's
say
a
I wanted a bunch of VM, but it would be on your local.
yeah, and it's a single binary, which is really cool.
But it includes cloud in it, so it does kind of act like.
Yeah. So I haven't had a chance to play with it, but I would tell you to check it out because it is cross-platform, and they've put a lot of time and money into it. And I wouldn't be surprised if you use WSL or WSL2. They're hiring. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in that stuff, Kanako is looking for somebody else to do WSL. So if you really like Windows and Linux, I don't see anybody in this room that probably would, but.
Anybody back?
So,
Thank you.
but that's it. You can do so if you want to get really crazy and you want a big Kubernetes cluster to play with. You can use something like KubeVirt. So we've been playing with that a little bit at work. So you can virtualize Kubernetes nodes inside of Kubernetes. So you can build mini clusters inside of your cluster.
Have you heard about the new rail version of Podman? They just released it. Which is supported not really CentOS 8 Podman.
Mm-hmm. I play with Podman quite a
Trying to
bit.
get away from CentOS with the community edition. They're trying to go to support it. This yesterday, the news came out, so I've been messing with that a little bit.
I like it because it's daemonless, but
You know, I think I'm gonna say,
they don't have a package for Ubuntu cleanly.
not yet.
So I don't want to run Fedora. Have it on Manjaro. Interesting about Manjaro, I've been running Manjaro, that they got Podman, right? But they don't have any of the UIDs set up the way Podman expects. So you have to do all that by hand. Yeah. Learned all kinds of weird things in the last 4 or 5 months. So anyway, that's it. Any more questions? Anything anybody wants to know specifically? You can find me on my slide, phillipsj.net, through the meetup here. I'll post the slides. I'll share them out and post it there, and I'll post the blog post I made. If you got any questions, feel free to ask.
Is everybody on the Knox Devs Slack? So good place to communicate with people in this area.
Okay.
Yep.
Knock devs.
Yeah, you can get an invite from the knoxdevs.com homepage. It's about halfway down. And there's a DevOps channel we're in.
Yep.
You can find us there.
There's AWS, which is kind of quiet, and Azure, which is quiet. Not GCP, but
The cloud specific channels are kind of quiet.
Yeah.
Everyone just kind of congregates in the DevOps channel.
there's a good Linux channel if you want to see what's going on. It's mostly Mark, which I don't actually know his name. Mark. So, yeah, he works at Discovery now.
He does. He's been there probably almost as long as I have.
Okay.
All right. Everybody, thank you.